It seems like we step away for just a single additional week between events, and the MMA world just goes crazy. There are a multitude of things that have transpired since I last talked to you. Arguably the biggest being TJ Dillashaw, 2-year suspension for popping hot on an old test, of all things, relinquishing his bantamweight title and turning that over. And it's crazy to think, it reverberates throughout the UFC. We've got Cody Garbrandt now talking about whether he'd still be the champion or not, had he been penalized earlier when he should have been. We've got a bantamweight division that has no champion. We need to qualify the division by crowning a champion. And it looks like we're going to have Marlon Moraes versus Henry Cejudo, as I previously and unfortunately predicted. I was hoping for maybe Marlon Moraes versus Pedro Munoz, two bantamweight fighters. But hey, we're going to get Cejudo coming up. And now you would think that would spell the end of the flyweight division, but just recently Jussier Formiga versus Joseph Benavidez 2 has been announced, which should set up the next title contender in that division. But then you have Wilson Hayes going on record saying the division by the middle of summer will most likely be dissolved. So I don't know what to make of it. It's unfortunate if that's the case. It seems there's so much uncertainty. You really can't invest yourself too much in the 125-pounders at this point. We had the Conor McGregor scenario where he retired and unretired. And again, I assumed most of us did. It's not really a groundbreaking thing to assume that it was just a promotional ploy. Maybe he hasn't unretired. Maybe he's just talking shit again. Either way, I anticipate we'll see him fight for the year's out. Brock Lesnar dropping the WWE Universal title, which pretty much clears the way for him to return to the UFC in the summer for a much anticipated by many fight with Daniel Cormier. I guess I'm looking forward to it. It doesn't make a lot of sense for me, but hey, it is what it is. BJ Penn recently being tagged with a domestic abuse. I think it happened today or yesterday, a domestic abuse case. Ronda Rousey, again, this is WWE, dropping her title at WrestleMania and then now going, stepping away from that. I believe she's going off to have a kid. Either way, a whole pile of various mixed martial arts related events taking place. Just a lot of things to cover. And most of all, or at least most importantly to me, and if you're listening to my show, probably to you, is that I need to get my shit together and start predicting properly. Again, I struggled through the last event. I had some successes, but ultimately it just didn't work out the way I was hoping it to. And I'm hoping that I'm going to put a strong effort together here for lots of work. We'll see if the fights play out the way I want to. Again, I attribute a lot of it to good matchmaking, and it makes it very difficult to predict fights. And then when you throw in the odd upset that's unexpected, it's further can really tarnish your record. Nonetheless, welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we are breaking the upcoming April 13th UFC 236 event, which will feature a rematch between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. This time taking place at lightweight with the interim lightweight title on the line. All 5 of my main card predictions will be available at KamikazeOverdrive.net. All my preliminary picks will be available at KamikazeOverdrive.net. All 5 of my main card picks available on this episode of the show. My bet packs, which have been had a couple hits on the last show, but nothing worth noting, are for sale for just $15. Again, I gave you a full betting breakdown of the card. We'll have to see how things play out. You can follow me on Twitter at KO_predictions, and I've been rambling for a little bit at this point. I think it's a long time we get into that first main card prediction. The first fight in the main card is actually the first of 2 rematches we're going to see on the pay-per-view. It takes place in the UFC's light heavyweight division as the 12th ranked Ovince St. Preux, currently carrying a record of 23-12, takes on Nikita, the minor Krylov, fighting out of the Ukraine, currently unranked in the UFC. He has a record of 24 wins and 6 losses. Now, this is a rematch dating all the way back to UFC 171, a 2014 fight that OSP won via 89-second Von Flue choke. Now, OSP won, when you look at that fight, that was the 4th of 5 wins in a streak that OSP was putting together, and 5th win of 7 fights. So he was really having a lot of success during that span. For Krylov, he fell to 1-2 in the UFC, but after losing that fight, went on to win in a very impressive 5 consecutive matches. Now, physically, both guys are 6'3". OSP is 3-inch. Will have a 3-inch reach advantage, and Nikita Krylov is the younger fighter by 9 years. Now, since their first fight, St. Preux has gone 8-7, where Nikita has gone 9-2, which included a very solid 4-0 run on the regional scene after not re-signing with the promotion, stepping away, and then coming back. Now, you look at their first fight statistics. Both guys landed 1 significant strike. Yeah, so 1 significant strike. OSP scored a takedown. Krylov held onto a guillotine incorrectly and for a prolonged period of time when he had no control over the body. That allowed Ovince St. Preux to set up a Von Flue choke that he's become very famous for, to the point where people are anticipating that they should change the name of the Von Flue choke to the St. Preux choke, which, hey, has a good ring to it. Nonetheless, he was able to put Nikita to sleep. Now, in that matchup, we saw OSP shoot very early. He passed Krylov's guard almost immediately, and Nikita was very limited by the fence and was put to sleep shortly thereafter. Now, since that matchup, we could argue that OSP has been trending down. But you could also point to the fact that he has been taking a sizable step up in competition. As a result, he's had mixed results, facing very good competition like John Jones, like Volkan Ozdemir, like Dominic Reyes, and coming up short in those fights, but winning other matchups along the way. So one of the questions you have to ask is who's improved more since their first meeting? And arguably because their first meeting was so short, so brief, and very limited interaction-wise, it's hard to get a good understanding of how that fight would have played out over a prolonged period of time. But OSP is that he's coming off a loss to Dominic Reyes. He had a comeback win over Tyson Pedro. He lost by submission to Ilir Latifi. He had a knockout win over Corey Anderson after losing the majority of the fight. That's not exactly a good track record in recent appearances. Now for Krylov, he returned to the UFC for the first time in 2 years, took on a very hot and streaking Jan Blachowicz, and scored an early takedown, had some success early on, lost position, got taken down in round 2 again, out position again, and eventually submitted. So again, potential UFC jitters coming back, but even though he looked fairly good for brief durations in that matchup. Now, when you look at these two guys, what Krylov does exceptionally well, and with the advantage I expect to have him see here, is he works at a much greater pace than Ovince St. Preux, and he appears to be the faster fighter as far as I'm concerned. He likes to wear opponents down and simply break them with pressure and pace and volume. And ultimately, I don't think he's ever won a fight by decision. I think if he's finished and been finished in all of his matchups, which is kind of indicative of that style. For OSP, he is susceptible to cardio issues. If he's pushed, he will break. It can also result in getting finished, either from exhaustion or, we've seen him put down with flush connections, guys that are able to hurt him and take him out of there. Against Jimmy Manawa, that early stages of the fight, he had some success, slowed down, and Manawa finished him off fairly quickly. Now, one thing I don't like that OSP does that will play right into Krylov's wheelhouse is that he starts to put himself on the cage. He will slow down, he limits his space, and he gets teed off on and really has limited offense that he's able to send back in the other direction. Now for Krylov, his aggression absolutely puts him in some bad spots, both standing and grappling. He will often go for stuff that costs him position. His striking, his aggressive striking will open him up to taking some damage, and his cardio isn't exactly amazing. Even though he will push a good pace, he will also slow down at times. Ultimately, that scenario of being unaware of what situations you're in and being simply too aggressive cost him in the first OSP fight. And we saw Jan Blachowicz have a lot of success putting him on his back, taking him down and finishing him, and he wasn't able to get out of a bad spot. Now, and OSP is that type of fighter that can absolutely capitalize and put you away in a fight like that. We saw it in the first fight. We saw it against Tyson Pedro in a fight he rallied in. We saw it probably in his last complete performance in his win over Yushin Okami. It's also worth noting Krylov's been finishing all of his losses, 5 of 6 coming by submission, so if OSP gets him down, he can definitely add to that total. When I look at this here, and I'm trying to take some pointers from some of the guys I've been listening to and other actual MMA experts, the speed situation is crucial. I think that favors Krylov. OSP, I would wager, is the stronger man, but he's more stationary, and the cardio advantage favors Krylov as well. And I don't think Nikita's lack of experience in long fights is a huge issue, simply because OSP doesn't have that ability to push guys late in fights himself, because he does slow down so drastically. OSP certainly could replicate that first experience, take him down, grind him out, and submit him at some point. I expect Nikita to learn from that first fight, and I feel he'll be in a better spot this time around from his actual re-debut, where he's a little bit more comfortable and he's settled in a little bit more. OSP, I think he has, in fact, struggled with pressure. He's a little bit slower than the last time they fought, and as far as we've seen, he's struggled to put together complete performances, and Krylov's that type of fighter that if you open a doorway or open an avenue for him to attack and engage, he will put it on you, and you have to be very fortunate to turn things around. I think Krylov pushes him here, wears him down, and my prediction is Nikita Krylov to defeat Ovince St. Preux by TKO. Our next go-around transpires in the UFC's welterweight division as Jalin Brahma Jouban, 16-6-0, returns to action when he takes on the body snatcher, 9-2-0 Dwight Grant. Now, Jouban's coming off an early 2018 knockout victory over Ben Saunders. It snapped a 2-fight losing skid, and to date, through 11 fights in the UFC, he has won 7 of them. For Dwight Grant, he's coming off a knockout win over Carlo Pedersoli, a fight I incorrectly predicted. He is 1-1 in the UFC, not including a 1-0 record on the Contender Series. Physically, Grant 1 inch taller, but he will have a sizable 5-inch reach advantage, and he is the younger fighter when compared to Jouban by 3 years, and Jalin Jouban is returning to action after a 13-plus month layoff. Now, Grant, having watched him in a very short sample size, very brief sample size of his capabilities, has been a bit of a frustrating fighter, but he's still incredibly dangerous. Of his 9 pro wins, 7 have come by knockout, 4 in the first round, 2 in the third round. Now, he tends to let opponents dictate the pace. He likes to sit back and allow the fight to come to him. Versus Pedersoli last time out, he was a reactionary striker looking to counter and engage after being engaged. Ultimately, it worked out. He eventually timed him and caught him with a vicious knockout blow at the end of the opening frame. Conversely, in his debut against Zach Otto avoided the big shots, slowed the fight down to his pace, and ultimately won a close decision. Controversial decision, but it's just one of those fights. And Grant, similar situation in the Contender Series. He won it in the second round. He let the fight come to him, and eventually the knockout presented itself. Does that always work at this level? I don't know. Now, for Jouban, he has been, I hate this term, but it does apply. I think that he's been a solid gatekeeper in the welterweight division. He's beat those lower-level guys he's supposed to beat, and he's not allowed, but at least been that stepping stone for a number of better talent, slightly better talent or above-average talent. Guys like Nico Price, Warley Alves, Gunnar Nelson, and the Albert Tumanov, no longer with the UFC on his own choice. Those guys have beat him back. Jouban has been knocked out 3 times, which is worth noting, twice in the UFC. He's a guy who's very hittable, absorbing roughly 3.5 significant strikes per minute. He has had issues with pressure and power-based strikers, and while he fared fairly well against Mike Perry, he did get buzzed a couple times in that matchup. When he fought Nico Price was able to walk him down, and we saw Jouban struggle off the back. His back foot got beat up, got tagged, and eventually got finished. Now, Allen, one of his better aspects, he's a pretty good kicking game, and his offense works from the outside fairly effectively. And that could be the key here against a guy like Dwight Grant, to keep him out of range, hit him, and not be in a position to take that counter strike or that return fire that often comes. Jouban does have power, 10 wins by knockout, so nothing to sneeze at there. And he's far from a dangerous fighter, and he certainly can send some pretty nasty offense back the other direction. We could see him go the route of looking for takedowns, flatten out Grant, put him on the ground, and really take it to him. But Grant's takedown defense last time out, his sprawl looked fairly good. As long as he doesn't over-accentuate it and throw his hips back too much and get himself off balance, get himself put in a bad position, he certainly is capable of working some takedown defense and staying on his feet if Jouban wants to go that route. Now, you look at Alan Jouban here, it's not... You wouldn't anticipate it, but the guy's 37 years old. That's getting up there for the welterweight division. For the light heavyweight division, the heavyweight division, that might not be as big a concern. But again, at welterweight and below that, age adds up quicker, where speed and technique are more crucial. He's been fighting since 2011. And I think he has, 22 pro fights. That's quite, not a ton of fights, but that's enough. For Grant, he's 34 years old. He also started in 2011, but he has half the fights, which means he has half the experience. He also has half the mileage. That's something worth noting here. The layoff for Jouban is also a major concern. If he gets off to a slow start against Grant, that absolutely could hurt him and cost him this fight. Jouban ultimately needs to be the more diverse and active fighter, outwork Grant from start to finish, and he needs to avoid that return offense that's going to come in his direction. Grant, I'd say, is the quicker fighter. He showed a little more aggression in his last fight, which I liked. He's got a big reach advantage in this matchup, which I think is also crucial. I think ultimately, I gotta stop that. He is going to catch Jouban in an exchange. He's going to tag that chin that's been a bit of a question mark, hurt him, finish him, and my prediction is Dwight Grant to defeat Alan Jouban by knockout. Another solid example of matchmaking goes down in the UFC's light heavyweight division as Eryk Anders, currently holding a fairly solid 11-3 record, takes on the 7-3 Khalil Rountree Jr. Again, very, very solid fight. Very much looking forward to this one. Anders started his UFC run 2-0 and looked fairly good, but he has, for the most part, struggled, winning just one of his last 4 fights. But you look at the losses, 2 of them by split decision to Lyoto Machida and Elias Teodoro. Arguments could have been made for both of those fights to be victories. And, of course, the TKO loss that he took on short notice against Thiago Santos, who's on the verge of fighting for the title. Now, Rountree, he's coming off a loss to Johnny Walker, a brutal knockout loss, a one I correctly predicted. He had 3 wins and a no contest loss, loss turned no contest prior to that defeat. Now, Anders has recently come up from middleweight, and for Rountree, he's a smaller light heavyweight, so it's not exactly an overwhelming size advantage here. In fact, both guys are 6'1", 1 inch reach advantage for Khalil, and he is the younger fighter, strangely enough, by 3 years. Now, Rountree is very dangerous. He has massive knockout power. 5 of his 7 wins have come by KO or TKO, including knocking out Gokhan Saki, Paul Craig, and I think at least one other fighter in the UFC. He throws very heavy... it was Jolly. He knocked out Jolly. He throws very heavy hands, and ultimately he only needs to land one shot to put his opponent down. That makes him very dangerous. Anders has only been stopped once via strikes, which was the end of the third round against Diego Santos. He was just exhausted. It was a short notice fight. He moved at 205, and he was just at the end of the 5-minute mark of the third round. It was death by accumulation. He couldn't get up, and the referee called it after 15 minutes of fighting. So it took a lot to get him out of there. Now, we can probably postulate here that if Rountree tags Anders flush, he can take him out. But his window for success is limited by a very, very, I don't want to call it brutal, but a below average cardio. Rountree throws everything with power, and what this leads to is a slowdown. If he can't get his opponent out of there, he's going to slow down. He struggles to land with power or with regularity as the fight progresses once he starts to experience that drop-off. Now, can Anders avoid that damage early and get this fight into the later stages? I think he has a good shot at doing it. Anders is the better all-around athlete, and he's had more success in longer fights. Those are two significant advantages for him. He's had issues finding his range at times, and kicks have given him trouble on the outside, but don't expect to see a lot of that from Khalil Rountree. He'll throw some hard leg kicks and body kicks, but they're certainly not going to dominate his offensive flow. We did see Anders inflict some decent damage on Theodoro, but it just wasn't consistent enough to pull away and earn that decision. The key for Anders could be his willingness to look for takedowns. He landed 6 against Diego Santos. He took Lyoto Machida down on 3 occasions, which is fairly significant. And Rountree has had issues with his takedown defense, and it can actually encourage and hurry along his cardio drop-off, which is also worth noting. Even if Anders can't score clean takedowns, if he can get on the inside, work in the clinch, force Khalil to work hard in defense, he has a legit chance of wearing him out and scoring that decision victory based on banking those points. If Rountree, as I mentioned, lands flush, he could score a knockout. He could knock out a horse if he lands flush. Let's be honest, people. But Anders is pretty durable and should have a speed and athletic advantage in this fight. Anders, I think, is going to grind on him. He's going to make him work. Rountree's going to tire. He's going to be far less effective both defending takedowns and landing offense. Anders simply outworks him here for the duration of the fight and could stop him, but my prediction is Eryk Anders to defeat Khalil Rountree Jr. by decision. In the co-main event of the evening, we have the first of 2 interim title fights, this one transpiring in the UFC's middleweight division as the unrequited, middleweight title challenger, the 4th-ranked Kelvin Gastelum, carrying a current record of 15 wins and 3 losses, will meet the last style bender, the 5th-ranked Israel Adesanya, with a current and impressive undefeated 16-0 mark. Now, I said this is an interim title fight. It's interesting to note that Whittaker won an interim title fight and then was declared champion when GSP left his title behind. Now, Gastelum, as I previously mentioned, was booked to face Robert Whittaker. Whittaker was out of the fight. The fight got canceled. And then Adesanya got promoted and had the big showdown with Anderson Silva. But we have seen fights like that get booked, not happen, and a fighter misses out on his opportunity to win, get a shot at the title through no fault of his own. Is Gastelum going to fall into that scenario? I guess this fight will go a long way to proving that. Adesanya said he's undefeated in MMA, 5-0 in the UFC. He has wins over Derek Brunson, Anderson Silva, Brad Tavares, which is a pretty solid list of opponents. Again, not overwhelming, but again, solid names. For Gastelum, 10-3 with a no contest over Vitor Belfort. He has 3 wins, 1 loss, and that aforementioned no contest at middleweight. It was a win originally, so we could argue he's 4-1 at middleweight. He stopped Tim Kennedy, he stopped Belfort, Vitor, he stopped Michael Bisping, and he has a split decision win over Jacare Souza. To go along with that loss to Chris Weidman. Physically, Adesanya, 6'4", 7 inches taller, 9-inch reach advantage. Kelvin's 1 physical advantage. He's the younger fighter by 2 years. Now, the size is certainly worth addressing here. Gastelum is a former welterweight, actually like Robert Whittaker. He had issues making weight. He appears better suited to fight at middleweight as far as making weight. But, from the stats there, he's going to struggle at times with the size of guys. And we saw him have issues with Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman was the bigger man, took him down. Gastelum had almost no answer for that situation and lost the fight as a result. Now, it's worth noting, and I just finished listening to one of Chael Sonnen's podcasts. I listened to a lot of that on my way to school in the morning, on my way to work. Sonnen talked about everyone dumping all over the smaller guy in a lot of matchups. And we just saw Anthony Pettis knock out Wonderboy Thompson. We saw Jorge Masvidal take out Darren Till. The smaller guy, who is the underdog in both fights, he says, and he makes a lot of sense. It's a valid argument that size doesn't matter until you start wrestling, until you start grappling. Doesn't have an impact there. The bigger fighter doesn't get the advantage till then. When you're striking, it's the speed of the smaller man, arguably the technical advantage of the smaller man, that puts him in the driver's seat in those exchanges, and we saw that in both those. So we have to look at that and say, does that exist here with Kelvin Gastelum? Gastelum, I said, versus Jouban. Kelvin dropped him on the feet early in that fight, but ultimately, as Sonnen said, he couldn't stay vertical, and that's when the size became a factor. So that's certainly an interesting way of looking at this fight. But then you have to ask yourself, what about the length and reach of Adesanya? Jon Jones has built a career on being the longer fighter and utilizing it to absolutely nullify the offense of his opponent. Very good fighters, championship level opposition, and Jones has made them a non-factor in title fights. Kelvin's power and work rate, they mean absolutely nothing if he can't reach Izzy in this matchup, and that's certainly something worth looking at here. I would say when you compare the two, Israel has the technical advantage, but can he deal with the pressure and the pace of Kelvin Gastelum? And that's a great question. We have seen issues where guys have put pressure on Israel and rendered him on the defensive side of things. Marvin Vettori had a lot of success pushing him early. Even if you go all the way back to Wilkinson in Israel Adesanya's debut, Wilkinson, I don't know if you want to say won the first round, but had a lot of success in the first round, putting a lot of pressure on him. Obviously, Adesanya's grown since those matchups, fought better competition, but still, Gastelum is also a very good opponent who has a lot of positives going for him that certainly could present problems for the former kickboxer. There's also the question of, can Israel stay vertical? Gastelum can work a wrestling-based attack to both score offensive points in the now, in the moment, and bank that physical expenditure for Israel. Force him to work hard, and later in the fights, particularly rounds 3, 4, and 5, if Kelvin's forced him to work, forced him to defend, suddenly we see that slow down. The lactic acids build up. Israel's striking isn't nearly as crisp, nearly as smooth, nearly as energetic and quick, and the takedown defense isn't there, and Gastelum starts to pull away as a result of making Adesanya work early in the fight. That's certainly a situation we need to be very aware of. I trust Gastelum's tank over Israel's in this fight, and his ability to get in low is going to help him to really clinch and get Adesanya on the mat. It'll give him advantage where he doesn't have to make these massive level changes if he wants to go that route. I'm a little bit concerned that Kelvin's going to want to stand and bang with this guy. It's not a terrible, one-sided, completely impossible venture, but I need to see him go to that wrestling, go to that grappling, go to that close-range pressure-based attack that gives him a better chance of being successful here. Adesanya, the way I look at him, he's a sniper. He has a variety of striking techniques, a variety of ways of hurting you, but he needs to be more practical with his offense and efficient with his offense. Really, jab, make you pay every time you think you're going to close that distance. You can't style on guys every single time and expect that they're going to simply go away or you're going to get the better of those exchanges. If he lands one or two high flashy techniques that don't put Kelvin down, and Kelvin's piling up 5, 10, 15 strikes in the same exchange, that's going to favor Kelvin overall, especially over a 5-round fight. At the UFC level, he has just 2 knockout wins, and they've come over 2 guys. Wilkinson's has a bit of a reputation for being a bit chinny, but so does Derek Brunson. They have a combined 7 losses by knockouts. That tells us maybe his knockout power isn't all it's cracked up to be. So if Adesanya can't snipe Gastelum coming in, and he has to keep him out of range for the duration of the fight and pick him off and outwork him and really nullify his offensive attack. That's going to be absolutely crucial, is that he doesn't allow Kelvin to land anything with regularity. What I think this fight comes down to is it's going to be very close in the opening couple of rounds. But what we're going to see, maybe almost in that Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos style, Kelvin's pressure is going to get to Adesanya. It's going to make him work. He's going to struggle. He's going to grind him. It's going to wear him out. And we're going to see Kelvin in round 3 start to have more success. And around 4 and 5, that pressure, he's going to land more strikes. The legs of Adesanya will be heavy. The takedown defense won't be there quite as adequately. And Kelvin scores more points. And my prediction is Kelvin Gastelum to defeat Israel Adesanya by decision. And finally, we move to the main event of the evening in the UFC's lightweight division for yet another interim title fight, as the reigning featherweight champion Max Blessed Holloway, with a current record of 20 wins and 3 losses, takes on the third-ranked Dustin the Diamond Poirier with a current record of 24 wins and 5 defeats. Now this, as a standalone fight, is a great matchup. Absolutely no denying it, a fight that anyone will be crazy not to want to watch. It's a rematch needed to have happen at some point. I just don't like the interim title fight tag. It hurts it a tiny bit. It doesn't hurt it. it just takes a little bit of that sass off it as far as I'm concerned. I'd love to see it as a straight-up title fight. Regardless, we're still getting a fantastic main event. One of the things you got to look at here, and again, we're seeing it with Cejudo going up and fighting for the bantamweight title, now Holloway coming up fighting here, is the featherweight division cleaned out. He's beat a lot of the top contenders, and some have cannibalized themselves. But there are a couple of guys. Zabit Magomed is certainly available. Alexander Volkanovski appears to have a fight with Jose Aldo on the horizon. So those guys are lurking and in the ether as far as potential title contenders. And Poirier is a former featherweight, but he's looked damn good at lightweight. It's actually crazy to think he made the move back to lightweight in the UFC in 2015. It seems like it was just yesterday. He was a featherweight contender, and now here he has moved up the ranks at lightweight, and he looks fantastic. He is 8-1 with 1 no contest in this in the division, so that's fantastic. You look at Max Holloway, though, he has won 13 consecutive fights, and that blows your mind considering what the quality of opposition and who he has beaten in that span. You look at the guys he's taken down in recent fights: Brian Ortega, I incorrectly predicted that one. Jose Aldo twice, Anthony Pettis, Ricardo Lamas, Jeremy Stevens, Charles Oliveira, Cub Swanson. Guys he has just outclassed and taken it to him and made them look pedestrian at best. Guys that are killers, absolute killers. For Dustin Poirier, no slouch either. He's taken out some pretty good names. Guys like the aforementioned Justin Gaethje, Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Jim Miller, Bobby Green, Yancy Medeiros. That's a very impressive list of opponents as well. But this is a huge fight. And Max Holloway, of course, the rematch, which we'll talk about in a moment, also on his list of victims. Physically, as I said, both guys fought at featherweight. The first time they fought, Max is a taller fighter by 2 inches, but Poirier is actually going to have a 3-inch reach advantage in this matchup. And for Max Holloway, he is the younger fighter by 2 years. Now, these two fought first all the way back in 2012. Max Holloway is 19, actually might have been 20. He was the youngest fighter on the UFC's roster when they squared off. Came in on short notice to replace Ricardo Lamas. And they started off with a fairly good back and forth on the feet. Max was doing this jumping knee thing that was a little out of place. They're both baby faces also. It's crazy to look back at that fight when they fought. For Poirier, he landed a takedown. He threatened with some submissions and eventually got to a position where he caught an arm and worked it into a mounted triangle armbar combination. Very impressive, forcing the tap out of a very young and still developing Max Holloway. As I said, both guys were extremely young. Not a lot of connections can be made between that fight and this one. You could at least say maybe Poirier comes in with a little bit of confidence, saying I've already beaten you once, and Holloway comes in with hunger and desire to say, hey, look, I want to show you that fight is meaningless because of how much we've grown since then. Now, how do they stack up now? That's more important. Now, you look at both guys, they are high volume, high output strikers. Statistically, Holloway averages 6.9 strikes per minute, significant strikes landed per minute. For Dustin Poirier, a very reputable 5.59, so nothing wrong with that. Death by accumulation seems to be the method for both guys. The ability to land and keep landing and eventually taking opponents out of commission with that volume and offense. I would give Dustin Poirier the slight edge in one-punch power. We've seen him put some guys down some big shots, but Max, of course, as we saw with the numbers, offers more overall volume. The cardio on both sides is great. Max's is fantastic, and Dustin Poirier is no slouch in that category either. Distance management is usually a big edge for Max Holloway, but Poirier has a reach advantage in this fight. I know Max is a taller fighter, so maybe it washed itself out a little bit, but again, we'll see how those exchanges work themselves out. Ortega is a very lengthy fighter, so is Jose Aldo, so it's not like Holloway's been fighting these smaller men in the featherweight division. Now, on paper, Dustin is the more accomplished grappler. He has finished 7 opponents by submission compared to just 2 for Max Holloway, and that ended up being the deciding factor in their first fight. But Holloway is almost impossible to take down. He has excellent distance management, excellent timing, and just very good balance and overall takedown defense. So I think Poirier is going to be hard-pressed to get his grappling involved this time around, and we've seen Max capitalize on guys who make ill-advised attempts to put him on the mat and actually submit them or put them in some bad spots. So I think that takes away an element that Poirier could rely on here to pick up a victory. I think the key here in deciding this fight is 2 things: speed and durability. Poirier is damn durable. We've seen him in some absolute wars and just beat up guys and get beaten up and come out the victor. But he doesn't possess an ironclad chin. Michael Johnson stopped him, Conor McGregor stopped him, and we've seen him hurt in other fights. I want to go back. I believe Joseph Duffy hurt him in one of their exchanges. He can be hurt. On the other side of things, Holloway has gone toe-to-toe with Aldo and taken the best he had to offer. He took the best Brian Ortega had to offer. He has simply absorbed damage and kept pushing forward. Poirier is willing to fight that type of fight that Max Holloway wants to be a part of. Poirier had success against Eddie Alvarez, he had success against Justin Gaethje, and he had success against Anthony Pettis in this style of matchup. But Holloway is more durable, he's more active, he's harder to hit, and he's going to hit Dustin more. It's not a good equation. It's not a good overall formula for Dustin Poirier here. Holloway coming up to 145 pounds should make him the faster fighter, even though Poirier spent some time there. I think Max is the faster fighter. He'll feel better not having to make that cut, even though Poirier is capitalized on that as well. I think Holloway's going to push him. Poirier will oblige, but eventually he will start to falter, and I think Max's durability will win out here, and my prediction is Max Holloway to defeat Dustin Poirier by TKO to become the new interim UFC lightweight champion. So those are my 5 main card predictions for UFC 236. All of my preliminary picks will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so go check those out. The bet packs will also be available, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's KO_predictions. Please head over there, chat me up if you'd like. You can send me messages through a variety of sources. Follow me on Facebook, subscribe to me on YouTube. Again, I'll be honest with you, my record in 2019 has been absolute dog shit. That's just a matter of fact. I'm looking to turn it around here. Again, I'm hoping we catch fire. We had one good show. The last pay-per-view actually was fantastic. UFC 235, I lit it up. Let's hopefully see if UFC 236, I can put the effort in, put the work in, as I usually do, and just get the results I'm looking for. Either way, should be a fantastic night of fights. Can't wait for these matchups to go down. Big playoffs coming up as well with Boston, Toronto squaring off. Let's go Bruins. Let's take them out, please. I am Canadian, but my heart is in Boston. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I will talk to you soon.